cared about, 110 years ago. And the list is all about creating economic stability. What has changed, you might say? That there's a lot of evidence that core concerns of Australians revolve around material issues. And I picked up the platform from the National Liberal Organisation because one would think, it came out of Victorian small L liberalism led by a leader who was seen as being one of the leading intellectuals of the period. You'd expect to find high-flying ideals. And the main item that wasn't related to, in a direct way, to material interests, although perhaps it was indirectly, was white Australia. So all of the political parties of the period were very committed to white Australia. So I think that we have something about the Australian character which suggests that our deep concerns are those of what a politician of a later generation, having quoted from the Liberal side of politics, I'll now genuflect to the Labor side, Ben Chifley's famous phrase, which is, of course, when ejected from office in 1949 by the up-and-coming upstart from Victoria, R.G. Menzies. He said, well, it's the hip pocket nerve. And really, that's another way of saying the same thing as Alfred had said almost 50 years before that. So as Australians, we're not really concerned with symbolism, and we are concerned more with material interests. Now, there's another line of approach as well that's made by other academics, and I'll just remove my political history hat for a minute and put on my former Professor of Politics hat and say that a number of very worthy academics and philosophers, including some of my former colleagues at the ANU, such as Philip Pettit, who was previously Professor of Philosophy there, argue that depending on your definition, what was created in 1901 was a republic. Re publica, a thing of the people. It was created by the people, and that's not just rhetoric. I mean, if I were in the US, that's a sort of, a favourite line of American politicians, but it was actually incredibly unusual because actually the draft constitution was voted on by Australian voters at the time. And that was really very unusual for its time. It happened nowhere else. Not only that, but people voted for the delegates who were going to draft the Constitution. So in that sense, it was seen as a thing of the people. It's also seen as being a republic in terms of the power-sharing arrangement. Although we don't strictly have the separation of powers in Australia, as you do more strictly in the United States of America, we do have three separate branches. We have an executive, a legislature, and a judiciary. And whilst there is overlap and duplication between the executive and the legislature to a greater degree than in pure systems such as the USA, you do have separation of powers. And I should add as well that I'm sort of playing the devil's advocate here, because people who've tended to make that argument have tended to also to be people who, when you actually get them out of their academic mode into the kind of coffee room, they will sort of say, well, why do we need to change? Why do we, we're happy with the monarchy because one of the core constituents of a republic really is stability, and having an act to play the symbolic role as well. Now, I believe that as a result of these particular factors, as a result of Alfred Deakin, as a result of lawyers, as a result of geography, perhaps as a result of political scientists, as a result of this creature called the Australian national character or Australian national identity, we don't worry about symbolic issues. And then one could develop an argument as to say, well, why don't we worry about symbolic issues? And one response, and this is what sociologists in my school would say, that having a level of material affluence and, more importantly, a degree of egalitarianism in Australia means a reasonably high level of satisfaction with the status quo. And they would tell me that we saw that recently in another UN World Ranking, where we're seen as a very peaceable society. And now we're in fact ahead of New Zealand, which used to be seen as the Scandinavia of the South, and now we're the kind of the Denmark of the Pacific in terms of those measures of good government. So that sort of change has already been achieved. Now, just I think in my summary comments, I don't want to sound as if I'm defending the status quo. I'm trying to explain why I believe we've been in this position of rejecting the referendum so resoundly, in spite of a very, very strong popular campaign that I thought was very effectively run. I should add, there's a footnote that, of course, at the time, as Warwick mentioned, I was actually at the ANU, and the ACT voted in favour of the Republic. So the ANU was doing its bit to support the Republic in spite of the view of many academics that we really had a Republic already. So there was something going on there. Now, how would one draw up a blueprint for change in terms of how would one mobilise public opinion? And again, looking at history, we know that the essential characteristics of a successful campaign to amend the Constitution have a number of characteristics. I've previously said it has to be about material benefits or giving more benefits to the people. But the other characteristic is there has to be bipartisanship. And even though in Australia we have this sort of aggressive party system and this whole tradition of cross-party conflict, which is probably stronger than in comparable societies, certainly stronger than in New Zealand or Canada. We have this high level of aggression. Yet on certain key issues, political figures come together. You also need, and so when you have divided parties, that's a recipe for disaster. And indeed, that's what happened in 1999. The parties were divided, and of course the Liberal Party was divided further as well. So that needs to come together. You need leadership, you need grassroots engagement. Because looking at old film of the campaign for the 1967 referendum, it was incredible, the level of mass mobilisation. Well, I don't think we use that term, or people use that term in Australia then. It was more of a 70s term. But people were actually out demonstrating, attending meetings. The churches were sending petitions into Canberra. Local government was involved. The whole society was energised. And it's that level of kind of energy and enthusiasm that needs to be created. And I wish those in the Republic movement success, not necessarily in their objective, but in creating that level of energy and enthusiasm. And in my view, it's more likely to come from the upcoming referendum around Indigenous rights. Thank you.
The Denmark of the South Pacific, Princess Mary will be thrilled to hear that, I'm sure. So thank you, Professor Marian Simms. And there will be questions when all three speakers have finished.